you've got a continuous process of succession. You have what are called seers, different stages in that succession, of which the first is a pioneer community. And if you've had a forest fire, or if you've cleared an area, if there's been some sort of disaster, there'll be some first species that come into that area. And here it's typically things like the birch and the balsam fir, then the spruce, then the pine, and you work your way through. Now, when you were working out at Cook's Lake last week, you got to see what's grown up since the Europeans came, and through the late 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. Most of Cook's Lake was a working farm, and the trees were cut down. More of it was put to agriculture than is left today, with that field in the middle. So what you see there is what's grown up over the last, say, 150 years, and it's a tangled mass. And more particularly next week, when you're putting out your traps in the so-called clearings, you'll see an area that was cleared about 20 years ago. Go away, squirrel. We're going to go flying in a minute.
Oh.
Sit down. Yeah. Sit. Lie down. Now. So you'll see next week when you go and put your traps out in the so-called clearings what can grow up within 20 years, and it's a real tangled mass. If you let that go a bit further, you start to get the succession of different species, some predominate over others, and there's this continual sort of, well, process of natural selection. Some species will do just that little bit better than the ones around them. In turn, they start to modify their own environment. They create an environment that's good for their own seedlings and plant community. Some insects then do better than others on the back of those plants. Some of the insectivores do better than others. And you get this gradual selection, this succession, that leads you through to the climax of that succession. And here in Nova Scotia, that results ultimately in old-growth forest of this type. It would be predominantly hemlock. Some areas where it's a little bit wetter would be cedar down by the seashore. Now, when the Europeans came, they cut down a lot of this old-growth forest because hemlock makes really good building wood. It doesn't rot. This boardwalk's made of hemlock. You can leave it untreated for tens, hundreds of years, and it really doesn't rot. The green and yellow house, once you get the siding off, are all hemlock, and that's why they've stood, for 90 years. They're very solid because of that. Lots of foundations and lots of ground contact wood is hemlock. Pines were used for ship masts, predominantly the long straight pines, so they went too. But these wolf pines, these with the divided crowns that split off, they weren't very valuable. They got left. So in some places like Cook's Lake, you'll see one or two big trees that really were never cut and have been there for hundreds of years, because they had no real value for timber and weren't good for shipbuilding and house building and so on. But in terms of the communities of animals that live in these climax communities, here the hemlock forest, they too become more and more specialised. At Cook's Lake we have all the small mammals you've been working with. There are lots of deer, porcupine, raccoons, all kinds of things, because there's lots of different niches in that habitat. It's very biodiverse. By the time you go through to a more managed forest, like you saw at Kevin Vino's on Friday, he starts to really select for some species that he wants and to actively manage against or even cut out species he doesn't want. So he's been very selective. And this results in a somewhat stilted community of animals that live there as well. Insects that live on the kinds of trees he wants will be there, and insects that live on the kinds of trees he doesn't want won't be there. And thus there's a knock-on effect with the bird community and the mammal community. The seed bank is influenced by what you are selecting from what you aren't. And the whole thing is quite neat and tidy, but nevertheless, because his operation is organic and sustainable, it's about as good as forestry can possibly be. It's a really very good example of how you can get an ecosystem service from the environment without destroying it. Up here on this hill in Kedzie, this got left really because it was too far away from the lumber mills down on the shore. We're about as far inland as you can get, and there are no powerful rivers up here to float the wood out, so it was just too much work. So